Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Learn with Jason. Today on the show, we're bringing in. Oh my God, I didn't ask how to pronounce your name, and it's German, right? And I'm gonna get this right. Is it Jans?
Yeah, Jans is the more wrong version of the wrong versions I heard.
Okay, how should your name be pronounced? I'm so sorry.
So the typical American version is Jens, which obviously is also wrong. Jans, I don't hear so much. So the correct version is actually Jens.
Jens. Oh, God. All right. Well, off to a wonderful start here on Learn with Jason today. So we have Jens. Thank you so much for joining us. How you doing today?
Yeah, it's actually a weird day because I'm currently in a hospital.
Oh
I
no.
get some treatment, nothing serious, but yeah, it's a bit weird with the Wi-Fi here, and I really hope it holds up. So, but yeah, nothing to think too much about it. But it's a weird situation because I had to tell the nurses to like not bother me because I have to do some important phone call. I didn't want to tell them I do a stream here, so it's a weird situation.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time. Very, very grateful to have you here. So, for folks who aren't familiar with you and your work, do you want to give us a bit of a background on yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm in software engineering for I think now more than 10 years. Before that, I was a carpenter. Accidentally, I had an accident with a truck that ran over my knee, which is also the backstory why I'm currently here getting some treatment. But
Okay.
that's fine. So that kind of pulled me into software engineering. I started building my first startup, so I didn't have any formal education or I didn't study CS or anything. I just wanted to build a startup, which completely failed because we had no clue what we were doing. But I learned a lot, and with that, I was off to a very interesting career. And I got super interested in stuff like GraphQL and compilers and building API gateways, and that ultimately led to building WonderGraph, which at its very core is using an open source project that I've built over the last, I think it's kind of like 5 years,
Mm-hmm.
where I really started implementing GraphQL from scratch, from like uh, lexing the tokens, parsing, then normalization, building an AST, and then figuring out, okay, how can I use an AST to plan and optimize an execution plan, then an engine to execute that. And this was really just like a side project. I just thought it's interesting to do. I didn't want
Mm.
to build a business at that time. I just found the project interesting to see what can I do with GraphQL. And yeah, eventually it turned into a bit more. It turned into a product. I found an enterprise customer who was willing to pay me for support,
Mm.
and that helped me to raise a seed round and build WonderGraph with 13 amazing people around me. And yeah, now we're building a company. It's super exciting.
That's a very like that's such a different story than you usually hear with a startup, right? It's not the I had an idea and so I made a deck and I raised funding. It's I was having fun and it sort of slowly grew into something that I was like that you felt needed to be that you could use the investment. It was actually a business. It's an emergent business as opposed to trying to come up with the idea and have a whole plan before you ever go raise funding. Kind of refreshing. I like that. So, how long has WonderGraph been around? You might have said this, but I think I missed the length of time.
I think the company from the moment we founded the company, I think it's about a year,
Okay.
but we are around much longer than that. Like the open source project exists, it exists longer because I started it just on my own,
Mm-hmm.
and it was kind of like a very long drag to actually get to the point where I can turn that into something real. So I think it's about 2 years probably, and in
Okay.
total, the problem space I'm working on is about 5 years.
Gotcha. Yeah. And so WonderGraph is you mentioned a lot of sort of the process that things go through to make WonderGraph work. But the way that I've been led to understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that WonderGraph is a way to bring together data sources from other places, right? Like I can plug in third-party APIs or other things into one central store in WonderGraph that allows me to then use WonderGraph as my source of truth as I build. Is that a good overview of how it works?
Yeah, I think it's actually very close. So the basic idea is when you use when you write a Node.js app, how do you let's say you want to use some code other people wrote. How do you bring that code into your project? What's the typical way of doing that?
I mean, it's yeah, you write a fetch query, or then if you need something that's got secret keys, you've got to set up a server or a serverless function, or you're trying to figure out, like, depending on what kind of node app you're writing, right? If it's running on a server, then you've got some server side functions that are wrapping your data fetching, and then you've got or you use Axios, or you reach for something like that as well. All of
Let, let's
which.
say let's say we want to import some code from another team or another organization or something. How would we usually do that?
It's npm, like a private npm registry, or you would need a monorepo, or so copy pasting in Slack, which I've definitely didn't been known to do.
Yeah. It's funny that you make this joke, but the point is, um, if we're writing code and we want to add a dependency, we first of all we speak about dependencies. We speak about packages. We have
Hmm.
something like npm, so we npm install React because we want to use React, or npm install Vue. And you
Hmm.
made a joke, but the point is, when it comes to APIs, what we actually do is we copy paste open API specifications
Hmm.
over Slack, or we take an open API spec or graphical schema and we upload that into a gist on GitHub and share that, or even Stripe put their open API spec on GitHub, which is not really designed for things like an open API spec, just code. And if someone wants to import an API into their project, there's no NPM for that. And that's essentially what we're building, because I think there should be package management, there should be dependency management for APIs, because when I build an app, and this is like from the past, in the past when I build an app, I have absolutely no clue what APIs it depends on, because you
Right.
install some SDKs, you make a fetch here, an Axios there. Do you actually know what services you're depending on, and how are they wired together? And this might look like a small problem for one single project, but if you think of a larger organization with 100 developers and so many applications they build, what APIs do their services depend on, and do they actually have a clue? And I think most organizations have absolutely no clue, because the moment you do an Axios or a fetch somewhere in your code, you created an implicit dependency between your service and something else.
Right.
But it is not, and there's no package JSON file that tells you, or API JSON that tells you you just made that Axios. So at the end of the day, we're building, I don't know, an exponential number of dependencies between services, and we have no clue about them. And I think that's a massive problem, because
Mm.
yeah, nobody knows what depends on what, and we have no transparency. And actually, there's not just like one API style, there's actually many. So we have like REST, we have SOAP, we have OpenAPI, we have WSDL, we have gRPC. And so that adds even more complexity to the problem. So I thought, yeah, that's something interesting to do. I want to make it simpler for people to work with APIs. And that's the kind of problem I made the center of my life, essentially.
It's interesting because you landed on this problem, and it sounds like you landed on this problem. You didn't work at a large company when you started working on this, right?
I actually did.
You
So
did. Okay.
yeah, kind of like the starting point was, so I was working for T-Online, which is German's largest news website.
Okay.
And the problem we had at T-Online is we had a news website, and this news website, it is backed by a content management system, internal APIs of various API style, like it could be REST API, it could be weird XML APIs, and then we had external data providers like football and weather and Formula One and all the different data things you want to present on a news website. And so all these data sources were different. And instead of actually adding value to the website, what we did was we were gluing together services and building backends for frontends, essentially, which is the pattern to assemble a number of heterogeneous systems into something more homogeneous that can be consumed in an easier way from the front end. And I thought that this is actually not a T-Online problem. It's in everybody's, like every company has to bring together multiple or data from multiple APIs, aggregate that, and then figure out how to bring it in an efficient way into the front end. And so what I saw is that out in the world, everybody is building kind of their own homegrown WonderGraph. And I thought it would really make sense to pull this code that everybody's writing, pull that into a library, make it open source, and yeah, find patterns that are very repetitive, like combining data from two APIs or combining REST and GraphQL and SOAP, like very standard use case, authentication. How do you do it? Token auth, cookie auth, and so on. So yeah, what I really wanted to do is take all these patterns, come up with an opinionated approach, and offer that as a framework so that everybody else can write less code.
And it's funny
Or
that you say
focus
this.
more on something important. Sorry.
Yeah, I very, very much agreed there because I worked at IBM, and while I was at IBM, I had the exact same set of problems. We were working as I was one of like 36 teams that worked on IBM Cloud, and that team had sort of taken their monolith and split it into 32 copies and called that microservices, and then they were kind of slowly pulling them down to just what was needed for each individual microservice. And they had the exact same issue where each of these teams was providing a set of APIs, but they were providing them in various different ways, and they had no way of knowing who was using their API, and the teams that were using them had no way of knowing, had it changed, were there updates, were there, how does this stuff work? So there was this huge amount of work being done to keep things talking instead of work being done on building features. And we had whole teams dedicated to things like maintaining the, just going around and doing upgrade work. You would rotate between all 30-something teams and embed with them to do a security fix or fix some data thing, and then you would move to the next team. And by the time you got around, you already had a big list of things that had to be done again, so they just kept doing around and around the circle. And so I actually worked on something very similar to this that never went anywhere. It was like a GraphQL federation thing where I had figured out that I could wrap all these different microservices with a lightweight GraphQL endpoint that I could then stitch together so we could know who was using things and how they talked and whether or not there were upgrades. And I don't bring that up to talk about that project at all, outside of saying it's fascinating to me that these ideas were they felt novel at the time, but mine was about 5 years ago as well. And so it's interesting that kind of like at the same time, in the same space, these ideas were emerging. And we saw things like a lot of GraphQL Federation stuff and a lot of different ideas that were sort of designed to solve the same general suite of problems. But this is the first time that I've heard of it thought of as package management, which is such a good way to frame this problem. Like, the reason that we liked Node and NPM is because you had this clear map of like what dependencies were being used and how to upgrade them and whether or not things were going to cause problems in your code base. Why don't we have that for data? Why don't we have that for third-party APIs and services like that?
Yeah, tell that the VCs.
You heard it here first, venture capital world. But no, I think that's so this is a really interesting space, and I think it also provides some really interesting challenges. So when you're working on this, how do you approach it when the world is so disparate? Like in NPM, for example, there's a whole lot of trouble just keeping track of like CommonJS versus ES modules and making those interoperable. So you listed SOAP, REST, gRPC, WSDL, GraphQL. How, when you've got this much complexity in the way that people deliver data, how do you approach making that something manageable? How are you kind of smoothing this out?
Yeah, the answer is quite trivial. So the implementation is extremely hard, and in fact, the implementation has grown to a point where it doesn't fit into my head anymore. So like 5 years ago, when I was starting to write this code, it was like I understand every line of code. Like when you showed me a bug, I can immediately answer like, why is it a bug? If you show me a bug today, like, we so don't worry so much about bugs. We have like, I don't know, more than 2,000 tests. So I'm very much like I wouldn't call myself a test-driven person, but this library is battle tested. The point I'm trying to make is it's just grown over the years to a point where like I know like all the concepts and all the packages we have, but if you show me a bug, then I have to dig into it. And essentially, the short answer is you need to find some common ground across all APIs. And the way you can approach this is you can find some agreement where you say, okay, our solution looks like this. Every API will return data in JSON format. So they don't have to do that. It can be any other format, but we will treat it or transform it into JSON, because then we have a common ground where we say, okay, everybody talks JSON at the end of the day. The next thing is you have to build a system where you can map out the different data sources and describe to the system how should we take an input and translate that into something this system will understand. So the input, in our case, is GraphQL. So the front end of the compiler speaks GraphQL, and the backend speaks whatever you want. So front, we speak GraphQL, we take a GraphQL AST, and then we translate this GraphQL AST into sub-ASTs that represent whatever the data source is. And what is amazing about this architecture is, so we divided the problem kind of into like a compiler problem. And what's amazing about this is if you want to add a new data source, you implement a bunch of interfaces, and that's really it. So it's a very easy to extend architecture. We just recently added support for SOAP. We're currently looking into gRPC. We're also very interested in the future in supporting async API. And for each of those data sources, all we do is we implement the backend of the compiler essentially. And depending on what data source we're talking to, there's some some like different levels of complexity. So for example, there are some data sources like REST or gRPC. They are very friendly because you make one request and you get a predefined answer. Like with OpenAPI, it is very clear. You make a request, it is very obvious from the JSON schema what you get back, or protobuf. gRPC, it is RPC. You make an RPC call, you know what comes back. The problem really is, and this is what took most of the years actually for me to understand and learn, is how to build a proper compiler architecture for that. Is let's say you have a query that comes in the front end, and on the back end, what we actually need to do is we need to talk to a federated GraphQL server, so multiple microservices, and then a second GraphQL server, and a third nested GraphQL server. And so the complexity here is that when you have a front-end query, you actually have to divide that into multiple, even possibly nested origin queries, how I call them, or origin requests. And that means you need to parse the incoming AST, you need to traverse every node, and then you have to figure out what GraphQL operations should I actually send to the origin. And that's really, it's a very complex thing. And it took me, I think, about 4 rewrites of the compiler architecture. And with the 4th rewrite, which is now, I think it's more than 2 years ago, it's kind of like very stable because we figured out all of the edge cases. So yeah, for me it was like a super interesting project. Now we're just adding data sources and fixing little bugs or making something a little bit faster here and there. But yeah, we're now mostly focusing on other layers. But I'm just, I don't know, engineer at heart, and I really love to talk about this stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, I feel that in my soul. Like, it's very fun to just kind of dig into the details. And so what I'm going to do, just to make sure that we have plenty of time, is I actually think it'll be more fun if we can start looking at this in action. So I'm going to switch us over into the pair programming view here. And I'm going to... before we get into it, let's do a quick shout out. We've got Amanda here with us from White Coat Captioning, taking down all the words. You can get the closed captioning button if you hit that little CC icon in your video player. And that is made possible through the support of our sponsors. We've got Netlify, NX, New Relic, and Pluralsight all kicking in to make this show more accessible to more people, which really means a lot to me. And we are talking about WonderGraph today. So let me get the WonderGraph site up and drop that into the chat. Also, hello, chat. How's everyone doing today? All right, so Jens, from here, I want to start trying WonderGraph. I want to play with it. What should my first step be?
Click Get Started.
Okay.
And then click the 1-minute quick start.
All right.
Or you can go one step back because we can actually quickly go over something. So we did actually 2 things with WonderGraph. One is on the backend side, we connect to all the different data sources. And then the usual progress is, or the usual way you deal with WonderGraph is you add your data sources, whatever you have. Then you define operations against those data sources. And the third step is that WonderGraph doesn't just build your API, but we also generate a fully type-safe client that handles like all the data management, API stuff, authentication, file uploads, and other things. And we build integrations with Next.js, Vite, Remix, Svelte, Nuxt, Relay, whatever, everything that's cool. And so if you use one of those frameworks, you don't really have to do much for the API layer, and we will see that in a moment. Yeah, Expo we have 2 for mobile apps, and we're currently working on some super exciting stuff with Relay, and that's coming out very soon. So yeah, let's click on the 1-minute quick start.
Okay.
Okay, and then we have like an yeah, okay. I don't like that snippet. I would suggest we use the sample project Next.js. So if you copy that first line, npx create Wondergraph app, and then you give it some name, and as example we use just Next.js.
Okay, and so we'll call this Wondergraph LWJ, and the example is next. Like that?
Next.js.
Next.js. Okay. Next.js.
Yeah, Next.js.
Okay, here we go. Oh, let me make that bigger so we can actually see it. Nice. Okay, so we have a project, and I'm going to go into it here, and then I'm also going to open that project in here. Okay, so here's our project. Oh, come on. There we go. Okay, so we've got our project here, and I'm looking at...
You're one of those guys who have the 5 on the right side.
I've done this for a very specific reason, which is when I am showing code, I like to toggle this open and closed, and it means the code doesn't bounce around.
Yeah. Okay, I think we need... Yeah, you're a professional streamer, I can see that. Yeah, you need to npm install some internets.
All right, so let's get the dependencies in here. That'll cause all these squigglies to go away. When do we get to the CSS? Benjamin, not today. You will not derail me today. I have a tendency to start working on the CSS.
Was it a bad idea that we have Tailwind here?
No, not at all. It's probably for the better, because otherwise I'll start writing the CSS and then I start having fun and then it's been 45 minutes. Okay,
yeah.
So we got our dependencies.
Would you consider yourself more like a front-end dev or more like a back-end dev?
I have worked in both roles, and so now I don't really know. I call myself just like a generalized web dev, because I can do whatever. I can get something built on the back end. I can, deploy apps on servers or build serverless things, and I've, done a lot of work on building and designing APIs, and I've also spent a ton of time as a designer and working specifically on UX interaction. So my career is very wandering. I just kind of go wherever I'm interested right now, and have ended up, I think that's why this job is perfect for me, because it means I get to learn a little bit about a lot, which is very satisfying to my particular style of learning.
Yeah.
But okay, we've got an app. So we've got an app. We've got the dependencies installed, and I'm ready. What should I do next?
I think it is. What is it? npm start or something? npm run start, I think.
Yeah, let me double check. npm start. Okay, and so this is starting both Wondergraph and OpenCLI. What is this? I actually don't know what this one does. What is wait on?
Oh, that waits for about 500 milliseconds for this thing to listen on that port.
Got it. Okay. Okay, so we've got the Wondergraph server is started. Next is yelling at us.
I think we have something running. So if you go to localhost 3K, we should see a Next.js app.
Oh, that opened.
That hopefully didn't explode.
It did not. I just need to move it to the right window here. No, come on. You, come over here. There we go. All right, so here is our setup. And
okay, that's our help wall.
We did it. Here's our app running on localhost 3000.
Okay, so that's the first step. I think the next step is that we make ourselves a bit familiar with the file structure.
Yes. Okay, so let me open this one up again, and didn't mean to open that. Let's look at this file structure. So we have, I see a WonderGraph folder. I'm just going to start opening things. So we've got generated stuff, we've got the pages, users, public I'm not going to worry about. Should I look, is tests something you want to dig into today, or?
We do it later. I
Okay.
actually have it. Let me check my agenda. Testing is. Yeah. Yesterday, someone wrote in our Discord that the stream will be today with you, and I was like, "Holy shit! I need to prepare something." So I brought a little agenda. Testing will come later.
Got it. Got it.
Okay, but in general, so we have this .wondergraph folder. A lot of people are actually complaining that it's stupid that it's .wondergraph, and yeah, I think it's correct, and we will at some point we will change it. But for the moment, we have a .wondergraph folder. It's a bit special, and every WonderGraph thing is in there.
Okay.
And so earlier we spoke about the package JSON and package management and this kind of stuff. So the central point for integrating APIs, or the kind of package JSON of APIs, is the WonderGraph config TS.
Okay.
And we can have a look at that. And so the most important bit, or something I want to explain, is you cannot just have a JSON or a YAML file to configure APIs, because that's just, it absolutely doesn't work. It's the wrong tool for the job, because if you integrate APIs, what you need to do is you need to, sometimes you want to do mappings, you want to set headers, you want to manipulate the result of the schema. Like, there's so many different things you actually want to do. And ideally, you can do them in a mostly type-safe way, so that you have the IDE help you, assist you in your work. And so that was like the core decision behind WonderGraph. So all configuration is in code. And this also has very big benefits from my point of view. There's other tools that do this visually guided, like you have a graphical user interface where you build data sources and stuff. But the point is, if you do it in code, you can check the configuration into Git. You have versioning out of control, out of the box. You can review changes in the pull request. And I think it's a great way to do this. It is inspired by things like, for example, AWS CDK and Pulumi, infrastructure as code, if we're familiar with that term. And so, yeah, what we're currently looking at here is, you see that introspect, it's a bit blurry for me, but I think it says introspect GraphQL. And that essentially means we want to introspect a data source, and then we say configure WonderGraph application, and we pass this data source as an API. And you can see we can do some other things. We can configure code generation. We can configure our beloved CORS that everybody gets wrong. And there's probably like the biggest amount of commits in the world is probably because of CORS issues. And then there's other things you can configure, like authentication and all this kind of stuff. We will come to that later.
Okay.
And yeah, if you go back to this introspect GraphQL, you will notice one other thing, and that is there's an API namespace. So we don't just introspect the GraphQL API, but we also give it a namespace. Could you guess why we do that?
My guess is that that is what we use in the WonderGraph GraphQL endpoint, so that I can say, you know, let me query SpaceX and then get into the SpaceX data.
Yes, so that's very much on point. So we didn't have that feature from the very beginning, but what we learned very early on, or what I realized very early on, is when you combine two APIs, it is very, very very likely that they will both have the type user, because everything has a user, and that's not the only problem you will run into. And so if you build a GraphQL schema from multiple APIs, what will happen very early on in your journey is you will have some naming conflicts, and you don't know where this type is coming from in that field. And so essentially, we namespace all APIs, and that's a concept. Again, we borrowed that from NPM and other ideas, so it's not something we invented, but namespacing things makes a lot of sense. And so, yeah, we import the SpaceX API, we add this to our APIs, and then you can go to the folder operations, which is another convention.
Okay, we'll go on to operations.
And inside operations, you can create GraphQL files. So for example, the Dragons GraphQL,
okay.
Where you simply write a GraphQL query. By the way, is this, do you have type safety? Do you have the GraphQL extension installed? Like if you try to type something below active, for example?
Let's see if I have it. I have syntax highlighting. Which extension do I need? Is it
I think the first one is the better one.
So I have, language feature support. Okay, let me install that one real quick.
Yeah, I think that's it's from the GraphQL Foundation, right?
Yes. So I have this now. And if I come in here and do one of these, there is autocomplete.
Okay. So yeah, you can change that query or do anything you want, but okay, that's great. So there's actually two ways of defining operations in WonderGraph, and what I have to explain is WonderGraph exposes either a GraphQL API, but most of the time you don't really want to do that. Most of the time you actually want to expose operations, and operations are simply it's simply JSON RPC endpoints. So this Dragons operation, which gives us name and active from Dragons, that is an operation. And what we can actually do, yeah.
I just want to pause you real quick because I want to dig into that a little bit. So you don't want to expose just a GraphQL query. You want to expose an operation. Why is that important?
Okay. Let's say you are in your IBM job and you deploy a front end and it uses GraphQL. After deploying the app, are you going to change the GraphQL operations?
You wouldn't be able to, right? After
so
deploying?
The answer is no, right?
Yeah. Right.
Okay, so you deploy something that you will not change. So the front end will not dynamically generate GraphQL operations. So what's the point in opening up a dynamic query interface to the internet when you actually don't need it? Because all you need is, you need to know there's a piece of code in my front end that wants to call this SpaceX Dragons operation, and we expect that it contains name and active as fields. So if we can take all this information and run it through a compiler, which I like compilers, then we can actually remove GraphQL from the runtime, and it makes it more secure. We're transferring less data. A query is actually not a post, it's a GET request. You can cache it with a regular HTTP proxy, and you don't lose anything because, yeah, it's really just like it feels and looks like GraphQL. You can even use a more advanced client like Relay. But yeah, there's no reason for most applications to expose a GraphQL API at runtime.
Got it. Okay. And so the reason for that being that if it's an operation, you're able to do a lot of the work ahead of time and effectively say, here's a reference to this query. And anytime somebody uses this reference, run this query, as opposed to letting somebody just arbitrarily write whatever query they want. And okay, so that totally makes sense. And this is something that's not unique to WonderGraph, like the idea of operations, because I remember there was also things like named queries or I can't remember exactly what the jargon was for it, but the general idea being, if you know what the queries are that are going to be executed against your app, then the best practice is to just have those queries ready to go instead of expecting your app to form those queries, because it just eliminates a lot of complexity and potential headache.
Yes. There's
Okay.
something, it is called persisted operations.
That was the one I
which
was
is the
thinking
wider
of.
term, or there's by the way, it is very important that you say persisted operations. Don't say persisted queries, because a persisted query can be a query or a mutation. And if a persisted query is a query, then you actually say, this is a persisted query. And that's super weird. So, yeah.
Got it. All right. So we're defining these as operations so that WonderGraph can do a bunch of optimization on our behalf behind the scenes.
Yeah, but not just optimizations. But for example, let's add a variable to this dragons operation.
Okay.
So after dragons, you can do like a variable definition.
What do I want to get?
Oh, that's a good. Can we first try out and what kind of variable could be of use? Because
Sure.
GraphQL doesn't allow unused variables. So does SpaceX Dragons, does it allow us to put any variable? Is that can we?
That's a good
Make
question.
like a.
Oh yeah, see if it'll let me do anything.
Make a bracket after that.
I have a limit and an offset.
Yeah, limit. You can do like a limit. Okay, that's good.
Okay, so we'll do a limit of limit,
and then
I can set up a limit. That'll be a integer. Okay.
Yes. Okay, that's awesome. And save this.
Okay.
And now, what WonderGraph does is we don't just do persistent operations. We do so many other things. But you can look into the generated folder, and it has some interesting stuff for us. So, for example, one thing you can look at is there's something, I think it's like JSON schema.
Ah, interesting. Okay.
Yes, and if you scroll down a bit, you can see for the dragons operation, the input is now if you scroll up a little bit, you see the input.
Oh, here.
It has properties, limit, it's type integer or null. And so we didn't just store a procedure or something. We also create like a JSON schema. This JSON schema is now used on our server to validate the input. You can even do like a regex or something, or extend that. What you can also do, you can import it into a front-end library that understands JSON schema and creates a form from that. So you actually don't even need to write manual forms anymore.
That's okay. All right. Now the gears are turning in my head. I'm seeing the value here. Like, this is it. It's one of those things that when you first look at a tool like this, it's very easy to try to dismiss it as like, oh, I've built something like that. And then when you actually start looking at all of the little things that you have to do to work with data, you have to be able to, like, not just query and display the data, but you also need to be able to, like, change the data over time. You need to be able to do things like add a variable and then know that all of your queries across the app aren't about to break. You, like, using form inputs, that's not something I would typically think of as being part of the data layer. That's something I would think of as an entirely separate project. But having those tied together well enough that I could just grab a library that can read the schema and build me a form, and now all I have to do is CSS, which we all know I love so much. It's like layers of value. It's not like, here, this is just for your data. This is like, wait, hold on. This is going to make the whole process feel a little more tightly coupled. and or more tightly integrated. It's going to feel more like, one process that's all aware of itself, and the code starts to feel smart. It's like the magic of autocorrect, but kind of like across layers of concerns.
Yeah. And to just show you another way where we leverage code generation and just the data we have, do you have Postman installed?
I do.
Let's open Postman.
I wonder what I was doing in Postman the last time I was in here. Let's make sure I don't have anything. Let's see. All right, there's Postman.
Okay, and then somewhere on the top left, there's like 3 dots, and you can say import or something. Where's collections? Can you go to collections?
Here's collections.
Yeah. Okay, and then you say import.
Import.
And now you open the WonderGraph generated directory somehow.
Let me make this small again. I've got the WonderGraph generated directory.
And there's something Open API JSON.
Open API.
We also have a Postman collection, but you can. I think the Open API has better quality.
Okay. And so, do I want this URL here?
No, you just take the file and drag it into this drag and drop thing.
Oh, very cool. All right, so let me find this in the Finder, and then I will drop this right into here. And looks like I've got 2 options. I've got a Postman collection or Open API 3.1 with a Postman collection.
Yeah, I don't know. Choose either one. I think
okay,
they
I'm just
are both.
Gonna hit the button. All right, so now I've got. Dang, that is okay. So that's really cool. So I've got value of integer null.
And maybe you can just try out with your dragons. So put in something, and then run that. And
okay,
the point is, you now created API documentation for your WonderGraph API, but you actually didn't do anything. It's just here.
Yeah, that's pretty slick. Like that is definitely the sort of thing that like I definitely have spent a lot of time trying to make something like this work, and it immediately went out of date because as soon as I stopped working on it, we worked on something else that broke this. And so knowing that this is generated as part of what's in the project, that's powerful stuff. Like this is definitely the kind of stuff that makes a big difference.
So if you're building a small app and okay, I built a small API, this is a utility for someone else, and I want to share it with them, you really just create one operation, and it can be GraphQL, it can also be TypeScript. Mm-hmm. You deploy that thing, you take the Open API spec or the Postman collection, you share it with that other person, and they now understand how your API works, and they can try it out with Postman or curl or whatever. And I think that's huge.
Yeah, that's extremely cool. Okay, so what should we do next?
So we created this API, and we saw, okay, we can use Postman to try it. Let's now have a look at our front end. How will we call that actually from the front end?
All right.
So in this case, we're making an integration with Next.js, and we have this index thing here, and you can see there's this use query that's a predefined hook. And if you go operation name, you will realize this is autocomplete, or this has autocomplete.
Oh, nice. All right. So let me delete this, and it's thinking. Let me try that again.
It's thinking a bit long.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. There you go. Okay. And so then it gives
now
us,
it works. Took a while.
Go.
Yeah, and then if you type after that, if you type input, we have the optional input, and then I think there you can define an object. And we had limit, which is optional. And then you can add a limit, save that, check our browser, and then it should not be two dragons, but rather one, right?
Mm-hmm. And if I update this
So,
to 2 again, there's our 2. Very cool. The auto,
yes.
I mean,
so
autocomplete your way to victory is one of my favorite ways to code.
Yeah, so that was a very simple integration, and we can now level this up a little bit.
Okay.
So I prepared one snippet. I will drop that into 1 second here into the chat.
Okay.
I hope that works.
All right. This is going to look a little wild. Where so I have it on my clipboard. Where should I put it? In the WonderGraph config.
Yeah, go back to the WonderGraph config. Yeah, exactly here. So put it there.
Okay, I'm just going to let autocomplete save us here. And now I have Federation Cloud upstream. So we've got account, products, reviews, and inventory. And that gives us a federated API, which looks like it is bringing in...
And we need to pass that to our APIs.
Okay.
Okay, and once you save this...
I'm already really excited about this
should...
because this just did a thing that I have always considered to be very important and extraordinarily hard, because we are stitching together what looks like 4 internal microservices into one API within the scope of the app. And that feels really good.
Yeah, so these microservices, they are compatible, so they use Federation. Mm-hmm. And the interesting bit is actually that we can now use SpaceX and this federated API side by side. So what we can just do in our operations folder, we can just do create a new folder. Let's just call it demo or whatever you want.
Okay.
And let's create a new. Let's create a products.graphql file, for example.
Okay.
Okay, and here you can just start with the query and see if you start typing Federation.
Do I need it to restart to pick that up?
Yeah, we need to see. Can you check in the generated folder? There's a GraphQL file. Can you check that?
GraphQL file schema.
Yeah, this one. And if you search for federated,
looks like it did not get picked up automatically. So I should oh wait, what don't you like? It's mad about something. Introspecting GraphQL API for namespace federated failed. Connection refused. Should I try again?
Can you check the code we're actually using to making? Do you see an obvious? Oh, is the HTTPS missing in front of? Yeah. How did that happen?
All good. Let's see.
You know what is weird? I sent this in the chat of the stream, and somehow
I bet it stripped it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very helpful that way. Okay, so let's go back in here. We'll try a query again. We'll call it products. But
I think the bundler is still a bit angry. Like maybe we need to give it another a reboot.
Yeah. All right. Let's give it a shot and see what. Okay. It still did it. Cannot load operation demo products. GraphQL document must contain exactly one operation. And that would make sense because I'm just going to delete this for now. Let's get rid of this one. And let's try again. Server
You're
listening.
a tinkerer. You can fix problems on the fly.
Okay, so now it's, I'm just going to stop and restart it one more time to make sure that it actually worked. It looks like it's working.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any errors.
If you want to check the graphical schema, we should be able to see if there's
Yes. Okay, so we'll go to
there's
the
something
schema.
with federation.
There we go. All right, so
Okay,
we've got
now we got it.
federated now. And that means that I can go back in here, create this products.graphql. And then in here, I'm going to go to create products, and we will grab that federated. Where are you at? Do you need to reload?
It should be here.
Yeah, it's definitely in there. And so why? Federated top products.
That's definitely an IDE thing. But
yeah, so this feels like it is not picking up my changes, which means I need to make it update. Configure file, configure. You're already there. So why don't you like this? Come on now.
Maybe you need to reboot the LSP or something.
Yeah, let me just, for now, we'll just empty this out, and that's probably going to yell at me again, but I'm going to close VS Code.
I could actually try and send you a query if that helps.
I think it's, I mean, I can fake one if I need to, but let's get this open again. I'm going to open this one again. And in here, now, you little punk, get my, there it is. There we go. All right, so we've got top products, and we'll get like the name and the price. And is that, you want me to grab anything else?
Oh no, that's enough for just demo purposes. So if you want, we can go back to our front end.
Okay.
And here, instead of dragons, you can now check out what else we have. So we should see, I think it should give us
something is
the federated operation.
Unhappy in my IDE right now. So it should be giving me all of that, and for whatever reason, it really doesn't like something that we're doing in here. But it's unclear on what that thing is. Oh, it's... What is that? Why is this thing struggling so hard? Knock it off. Okay, I'm just gonna...
I think now it's fine again.
There's dragons, but it hasn't picked up that new operation yet, which leads me to believe that it's doing something. It's not running, is why. that would explain a lot. Okay. Everything's fine. We're doing great. Okay, so now that I've got this, here's our demo products. And then in here, we don't have any inputs yet, so I think we can just save
You make me sweat, Jason.
I apologize. All right, so here's our dragons, and we'll just throw our products in there. And now, if I go and look at the home page, we've got products. Okay, so.
Okay.
This is exactly what we wanted.
Yes, great. Next, let's level this up a little bit.
Okay.
The next exercise we do is I send you another snippet, and we want to go a little bit custom. We want to combine data from multiple APIs in this next challenge.
Okay, so I am going back into my WonderGraph config, and I'm gonna drop this down here, let that autosave. Don't know why that's not. It did the thing again.
Probably it did the thing again. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll hit those, but why on earth? Look at that, it's not saving. Is this the day that my computer goes into open revolt? Like, what is happening right now? Come on now. Okay. Copying. Don't save. We are going to quit VS Code entirely and try this again. Okay. All right, so then I'm going to attempt opening VS Code one more time. And we're going to, it's already got that one open. So we will get back into this config file. And we'll drop this back in. Okay, now it actually saved, good.
Okay.
We've got the pieces.
We have a countries API. We have a weather API. You add those two.
Okay. So I'm going to add these.
And don't forget to
npm start.
Don't forget to add them to the API array, right?
Okay. So we're going to add countries and weather.
Yep. And then in line 40 or after line 42, can you make a new line and we add one more thing?
Okay.
So type experimental and make it an object.
Oops.
Just an object, and then we have there. I think there's ORM.
Okay.
Yep, and set this to true.
Okay.
Because I want to show you something that we've been working on for a couple of months, and I'm super excited that it finally was published last week. Because what we realized is when we started with WonderGraph, the first approach was that you can use GraphQL to write operations. And eventually people came to us and said, yeah, that's great, but I want to be able to customize an operation. I want to write some custom code. So we said, okay, we give you TypeScript operations, which are very much similar to TRPC or just RPC functions. And so we wanted to allow a user to interact with their API dependencies. We call that a virtual graph. Virtual because we don't really expose it. So we wanted to make that accessible in TypeScript functions. So we created an ORM. Okay. And this ORM, it takes all your data sources, and we're generating a TypeScript ORM. So you don't even need to use GraphQL anymore. And that's what we're going to do in our operations folder in the demo. You can just create whatever TypeScript file, like, I don't know, just call it custom.ts or whatever you like.
Okay.
And then you do an export default. And then you type create operation and do an import. And then you say dot query. Yes. And make that a function, pass it an object. And here you can pass a handler. So you can define a handler, which is an async function that takes a context.
Okay. Async, and it takes in context as the top level argument like that.
Yes.
Okay.
And I don't know why, but this happened to me as well. This .wondergraph import is actually wrong. I think it's actually dot dot and then dot dot or dot dot slash dot dot slash. Yeah. And then without the .wondergraph.
Okay.
Yeah. So now that's actually correct. Okay. In this context, we have a thing that's called graph. So we can say context dot graph, and then you can say dot from. With from, you're selecting the namespace. So in this case, let's start with countries.
Okay.
And then go next, and we say query. And here we can say what we want to query. So you just pass it a string.
Okay.
And let's say we want to query a country. And you can say where. Pass it an object.
Object.
And here we can say code. And for example, you can pass DE for Germany. Okay,
Is
and
it
that's
upper or lower?
if you.
Is
Yeah,
it
upper.
uppercase? Okay.
That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, and then finally you do exec. Dot exec. Okay.
As a function
And
like that.
that gives us Germany. So you can await that at the beginning of the line. Yep.
Okay. Do I need to return this?
And that's let's put this into something like const country equals whatever. Yeah. Okay. And we can return this. So you can just say return country. Okay. And we save that. Some formatting. Nice. Okay. Let's try this out somewhere. Why don't we write a little test for that?
Write a test. Got it. Okay.
So we have in text, we have index.test.ts. And this is another thing where you can see like, yeah, Wondergraph is easy, but we also have a generated test suite. So you can see here, we have a VG test server that we start and stop and anything. It has mocking, and we can call in type-safe way our operations. You can now replace that with our test, whatever thing, and we can write a test. And this way we can actually test our API with Jest.
Okay, so I've got do a test, and we'll say country and so the const result of await WG client query, and I want the operation name of demo custom, and I expect result dot data dot
You can say code.
oh,
Code must be DE.
To be DE. Okay.
Now you can stop the process that we were running before. Just stop this, and you can run npm run test.
We did it. All right. So
you
we
know
wrote a
that
test, and then if I go break this,
you know that your integration is working, right? Okay, let's try US. That's a good point.
and now, oh, I broke it. Okay, so something I did is wrong. Oh, do I have to? Does the server need to be running to like regenerate the store procedure? Because I only changed the code.
You need to. Go to the package JSON. And here there's WonderGraph. Where's WonderGraph build? Yeah. Just run build WonderGraph.
Okay. Oh, so close. So close on the spelling. Okay. Do that. And now it's gonna actually break the way we expected because it's compiled that test or it compiled that operation and is getting the wrong thing. Yes, exactly. Ooh, received undefined. Who knows why the US didn't show up as a country, or maybe I put the wrong one in. Who's to say? Let's, oh wait, that won't do anything. Okay, that's, you know what? we got it running. It was matching the thing properly, and now if I test it again with DE, it should work. Oh, interesting. Something, it like lost the ability to get the country. I wonder if it's missing. Is there something else that needs to run for it to fully generate?
I'm not sure. Maybe we messed up something, but yeah, I don't know exactly.
Okay, it's, you know what? It's fine because we had it running, and then I went off the trail, and that is okay. What I can also do is I've got this running now, and I can run test in a side window here. Yeah, and then it actually starts. Then it's, so I think something was up with exactly what we were doing there. But then if I do this, save it, run test. And it says, get out of here. That's incorrect. Okay, perfect.
Okay.
Cool. Okay, so we've got a running custom query written with the ORM. This is very.
You could now, as a final step, and I think that's where we can then take it off. I think that's everything I wanted to show. You could now use the graph again and say, give me weather for the capital of the country. So you can say from the context
graph from, and we wanted
weather.
Query.
And then you say query.
We want get city by name, I would assume.
Yeah.
Okay. And then we're getting where name is country dot capital. Okay. And then dot exact.
You need to say country dot capital or empty string. Yeah. Okay. And then because we don't select deeply nested objects by default. So after dot query, you can add a dot select. And then you can pass strings for the path you want to select. So in this case, you could say, for example, what do we have? We have icon. So when you type icon, you will see the icon, and then you can pass a summary description, summary title, and you can pass these strings. It's just a variadic function.
Okay.
And then it gives you back all these fields.
And so when if I just do 3 of these to get those 3 pieces?
Oh, I haven't tried that, but you can pass all of them into one select function. So after select, you can have a comma.
Oh, you just add a comma. I get it. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Title and then maybe description.
Okay, yeah. So there's the pieces. And so now we've got our weather, and then I want to return that weather directly. Okay.
Yes, and so we can actually see the results. I think we could just use Postman, for example.
Okay, sure. I can open up Postman again.
You need to reload the collection we talked to Postman team, and we asked them, is there a way you can auto reload a collection? Unfortunately, that wasn't possible, so you need to delete the collection and re-import it.
Got it. So we will delete, and then I'm going to import and open up the Finder again. Hopefully it's still in the, it's not. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. We know how to get it back. It is the JSON API, openapi.json. So we're going to reveal this one, go over to Postman, and drop this in here. Okay. Then make this a little bit bigger. Here's our demo. Here's our custom. And I can... Oh, that one's just hard-coded. So this will give us... Here's our weather. And what we forgot to include is what the actual capital is, but that's okay.
we know the weather for Berlin, right?
Right. And so, but so this is, I mean, this is really cool. Like you can see how quickly this all kind of comes together. And it's extremely cool that, you know, as we're doing these things, the part that I didn't call out as I was doing it is like, these are all auto-completed. So like if I want to get these things, I just hit, you know, control space and it pulls up what the actual options are. And that's extremely cool. Like it's very, very cool how quickly that stuff all comes together and gives you the ability to grab like a value. And you know, this was all auto-completed. This was all auto-completed. The where was auto-completed. So it's very like you can tell that this is a smart system that's kind of talking to the schema at every layer. And I think that just is it's a very powerful way to work. There's a question from Go David. Is this only available in TypeScript? Are there other ways to use it?
Yeah, so that's only available in TypeScript. And there's one thing I really want to point out that I think that's for me, that's the magic about this whole approach, and where you can see layers building up on top of other layers. Because we have solved the problem of translating everything to GraphQL with the engine, and then we build the ORM on top. Now you can use this one ORM and talk to your SOAP API, to your REST API, to your GraphQL APIs, combine all the data into one request that serves your needs for one use case in the front end or whatever you're building. And yeah, I think that's just a very ergonomic way for engineers to work with data and to get something done. So I really like how this came together. And if you look at this code now, does it feel GraphQL-ish for you, or how does it look like?
And this doesn't feel GraphQL-ish to me. This feels, you know, like I've seen ORMs or data access SDKs look and feel.
Yeah. So yeah, I think like there's many other things we could show, but essentially for me that's really everything I wanted to get across. The idea of treating APIs like dependencies, and I think we've shown a couple of ways how you can do that here and how you can make data integration easier. And yeah, I would love to see some people trying it out. And if you have questions or anything, then we can have some more discussion.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I did want to just point out, because I think this is a really interesting and really important thing to call out here, is that when you have a setup like this, where you're able to plug in any data source, you can pull in, you know, it's REST, it's SOAP, it's GraphQL, it's whatever. The strength that gives you is that it allows for this really interesting incremental migration of tools. I think that a lot of times tools get built and sold in a way that is fully optimized for like a greenfield rewrite. And if you look at the marketing of a lot of tech companies, they're effectively assuming that you have the ability and authority to just wholesale burn down and rewrite your entire app. And for any of us who work in companies of literally any size, the feasibility of doing a full rewrite is practically zero. So the thing that's really interesting about something like WonderGraph is if you have an intention of eventually rewriting your entire data layer, but you can't do it in one go, which is highly likely, then by putting everything into something like WonderGraph, what you end up with is the ability to swap out back-end pieces without having to rewrite major chunks of front-end code, because it's giving you, okay, well, we have this old SOAP API that we don't want to use anymore. We want to migrate it to REST with OpenAPI. Okay, great. When you do that, as long as the API contract stays true, you can send whatever you want back, and WonderGraph is going to continue to return that data. And to the services consuming these APIs, you won't even notice that anything changed. And I think that's the sort of thing that gets glossed over in a lot of the decisions about like how to choose tech. But like, how painful is it going to be to make the change? Like after the fact, if you start adopting a piece of tech and then an underlying piece needs to change, how much does it hurt to make that switch? And maybe this is my crustiness as somebody who's been doing this for 20 plus years, but I am very much optimizing for the minimum amount of maintenance. I am not interested in building like an exciting solution that I'm going to have to upgrade every 3 weeks, because I'd rather be building features. I'd rather be building something valuable for the company, for the team, for the product. I don't want to be on call for like fixing maintenance stuff because like something doesn't work anymore. Now we have to go migrate, millions of lines of code over to some new way because we switch tools. You want this stuff to be painless. You want this stuff to be incremental, and you want it to be able to grow with you over time. And that's a very good thing. And so anyways, that's just a thing that came to me as I was looking at this. I was thinking about how much easier it would be with some of the projects I've done in the past, rather than we have to pull the brakes on everything, no deployments, rewrite this entire app. Oh my God, we forgot some stuff. It's all broken. Oh my God, everybody's getting paged. Instead, you can just say, all right, we put this new data layer in place. We will incrementally be fixing things as time goes on. And to everybody else, it's pretty, it's completely hidden and not really necessary for them to care about it at all. With that being said, Jens, where should people go if they want to learn more about WonderGraph?
Read the docs, join our Discord, wondergraph.com/Discord. You can chat with us. We are very accessible people. If you deploy, so we also have WonderGraph Cloud, where you can one-click deploy and synchronize an app with your GitHub repository, and that deploys everything. We have previews. Everything you just saw, like you get analytics of your operation. We're currently building distributed tracing, which I think is going to be super huge, because what you just saw with the ORM, imagine you make you call this TypeScript operation, and you're using the ORM, and because the ORM actually calls into our virtual graph, we can instrument every API call with OpenTelemetry, and we can give you a full trace of what actually happened and where was it slow and so on and so forth. So you can see again layers of value put on top of each other. Really just join the Discord, read some of the docs. I would say I have an interesting blog. I'm quite opinionated about some stuff. So definitely
where would one find
the
your blog?
I think there's a blog
one?
button. Yes.
Got it.
The one ORM to map it all. It is here. You're also invited to follow me on Twitter. It's Jens Neuse _de. That's my handle. Exactly. So
excellent.
Please follow me if you're interested in keeping up with WonderGraph. And
great. All right, y'all. With that one, I think we're going to call this one a resounding success. So make sure you go check out WonderGraph, go follow Jens. And thanks again to our captioner. We've had Amanda here all day from Whitecoat Captioning. Thank you very much. That's made possible through the support of Netlify, NX, New Relic, and Pluralsight, all kicking in to make this show more accessible to more people. And if your company's looking to sponsor this stream, we're going to have some sponsorship slots open up soon. So please do let me know. Make sure you're checking out the schedule when you are checking out things on the internet because we've got a great episode coming up on Thursday with Demetrius Clark. We've got Mark Erickson coming back. We got Jess Sachs coming. We've got so many great people that I have not had the chance to put up on the website yet. So please do stay tuned. We've got a cool new add to calendar feature so that you can get notified whenever an episode's happening. It's not noisy. It's just there on your calendar so you can see it. All right, Jens, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. Thank you all for hanging out. Let's go find somebody to raid, and we'll see you next time.